and get everything going. So, hi everybody. We are recording the Inventors Roundtable meeting of March 24th, 2025, and we just have been back now a little over a week from ASD Market Week, and what a show. So I was telling Andrea, I wanted to share one of the stories that came out of this meeting, because today I sent off 5 products for potential licensing. And interesting roundabout in all of that, the gentleman that came down, he had a booth upstairs, came down, was telling me about his product, was very upset that he was not in our booth. And it's like, you know, we can fix that for next year, but I can't do much about it this year. Then find out that he works for the NFL. And one of the products in the booth was one that, you know, the inventor wanted to license to the NFL. So then I called Lynn at 6 o'clock in the morning and got him back down there. And he came down and spent a bunch of time in our booth. Oops, hang on, everybody. Russell? All right, I will send you the email right now. We just started the meeting. And so hang tight. I try to post it everywhere, but you never know. Hang on, everybody. I know last Thursday we had it was the Thursday meeting, and I had a gentleman contact me and he goes, "Why won't you let me in?" And it's like, because I'm flying above Dallas right now. And I felt bad that he was kind of waiting to get in, but I was still on an airplane flying over Dallas. And wow. So anyway, this guy came back down. He spent a lot of time in the booth, looked at everything. And then one of our other inventors said, you know, all right, he had tools, went over to, I sent him over to take a look at one of the Tolson tools. And it was so funny because he came back and he goes, okay, Neil is mad at me and that means he's mad at you. So you need to go and make nice with him and tell him I'm really sorry. So it's like, okay, fine. And he goes, and you should probably take a 6-pack of beer. Okay, fine. There is no beer for sale in here, so you need to go and buy me a 6-pack. So he did. And so then I went over to see Neil and take him a beer. And so we're sitting down and he's telling me what's going on. And he goes, but you know, the coolest thing happened is that this guy came from the NFL and he wants me to get him pricing on this product. And I go, okay, was his name Len? And he goes, yeah, here's his card. He had already checked on getting the product made that was this, you know, athletic training tool that I had him come and look at. Well, then the 2 products that we sent off to the guy today that were actually tools, I sent 2 Tolson tools. But Len is the guy that was asking for the other 3 products. So it was amazing how this huge giant show, you know, we've got people that are kind of rolling over each other getting to our products. So that was good.
That's great. Awesome.
And we did enjoy it. So, all right, here is Russell. And so anyway, it was a very good show. You know, we're already working on next year's version and filling in the meantime, and helping folks get lined up for, you know, the next steps and all of that kind of stuff. So a busy week. Jeff was there, and Mike was there. We had Russell's products there, even though he wasn't there. And we had George said he had more hits on his product in 3 hours than he had at 3 years at the National Hardware Show. So that's always nice. So it was a very productive show. Anybody who had inventory sold it all, which is very different than at the National Hardware Show, where they don't want people to do the cash and carry. And these folks were, you know, really hard at it. So that was good. But anyway, you know, now that we've got a few people here, Greg, I want to introduce Greg Owens. He is, he was inventor, producer, owner of Sherrill Manufacturing with Liberty Tabletop Products, the only flatware that was made in the USA. So he knows all about manufacturing in the USA. And now he does that 3rd hour of Home Talk USA. So he's on right after I am every Monday. And he has just gotten back from South America and gallivanting all over, going to different international trade shows and everything. So what you have learned, Greg. We are excited to have you share with us. So please introduce yourself. Tell a little bit about how you got involved with, Made in the USA. And, I met him through ASD last year. So when we think, ASD, is bigger than just products, absolutely, because right before the show, Michael King had told me, he goes, I really want to do that third hour on Made in the USA. So I met somebody who was a good friend of Greg's and has the platform Made in the USA, Made in America or Made in the USA. I can't ever remember.
MadeInUSA.com. Don was on the show.
Okay. So they only have products that are made in the USA on their platform. So they're kind of Amazon's competition. And he goes, let me introduce you to Greg because he's going to be a better radio voice than I am. And that was, a match made in heaven. So Greg, we were very pleased to meet you last year and pleased to have you as our guest speaker tonight. So you're on, bud. Take it away.
All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Greg Owens. I'm the CEO of Sherrill Manufacturing. Our brand is Liberty Tabletop, as Rita said. I'm the co-founder, actually. My cohort in crime here, Matt Roberts, he does the manufacturing side of the business, and I've been focused on the sales and marketing end. And I do this Made in America Hour, following Rita, where we focus on topics involved in Made in America. In this first year, there's been so much going on in the trade space, which we'll talk about, tariffs and all that. We've done a lot of policy, not politics, trying to talk about what's going on and make sense of it all. And tomorrow, our company, Sherrill Manufacturing, celebrates its 20th anniversary. When we started this adventure back in 2005, and I'll talk about Oneida Limited, who maybe a lot of you have heard of Oneida Flatware before. Everybody thought we were nuts because if this $500 million company couldn't make a go of it, how are these two yahoos going to buy a manufacturing facility, 1 million square feet, and make it work? But backing up to Oneida's decision to shut the factory down, which really led us into business, they were in an extremely competitive environment. And the offices that we sit in were built when Abraham Lincoln was president. That's how old this business is. Flatware has a great tradition. It built the city of Sherrill, which is the city that we're in, which is the name of the company, Sherrill Manufacturing. But all the competitors had a decade or so before that moved their production all to Asia, mainly China, Vietnam, and Indonesia. And the basic issue was steel subsidies. China steel manufacturers are heavily subsidized by the government, and they provided their folks with steel at about half the going rate in the world, which gave them a huge leg up, particularly on the lower end products that are mainly steel as a component of the cost. And that led to that led to them coming to the conclusion that they could actually buy a box of flatware already produced, FOB Long Beach, California, cheaper than they could buy the steel in the United States to make it with. And that was sort of a game changer for them. So they tried to sell the factory. Nobody wanted it except for Matt and I. We stepped up and kept it going. And 20 years later, we're still in business and going strong. So how did we do that? Well, in keeping with the topic of inventing, we literally had to reinvent the approach towards selling into a very competitive marketplace. And we did that by going to the B2C business model, direct to consumer. This is back when Jeff Bezos was still selling books on Amazon. So it was sort of the beginning of e-commerce as we know it today. And really our decision wasn't that difficult. I like to call it the factory math. And this is something important for all of you that are thinking about channels of distribution, whether you're going to sell direct like we do, or whether you're going to go through retail. I call it mainstream retail. What we found was our product category that we sold was similar to Oneida. The biggest benchmarkers were Macy's and maybe a Bed Bath and Beyond, Williams Sonoma, sort of in that range, not the Walmart, Costco, Target type stuff. So those type department stores, if you go in there and you buy something for $100, they have about an 80% markup. So they're paying $20 for what you're paying $100 for, be it a sweater, a box of flatware, whatever it is. That's their business model. If you're buying something that's branded, that brand is buying it from a factory, let's say in China, and they have about a 50% markup. So that factory in China is selling it for $10. Okay, our cost was way more than $10, particularly with a scaled down manufacturing operation. It was way more than $20. We couldn't sell competitively to any of the brands, but if we could get $100 for it, we could make a go of it. So that was the direction that we went in. Big disadvantage to that is, the markets and everything are established at Target and Walmart and Williams Sonoma and all the big boys. So if you were able to get a contract with those folks, you had instant volume. We had to bootstrap this thing from the ground up. I think our first year of business, we sold about $250,000 worth of flatware. We've built it up to about $7 million today. So the B2C model was the model that we settled on. And as you go through the decision-making process and where you're going to make something, if you're going to get involved in that race to the bottom, unfortunately, it's probably not going to, the United States is probably not going to be the cheapest place to make something. It's probably not even going to be Mexico or Canada. It's going to be somewhere in Asia, India, places like that. So it really depends on the product and the quality level that you're headed for. We could never compete on the real cheap stuff, but we've carved out this higher value added niche. We have a lot of automated equipment, and that's allowed us to make a go of it. I'm going to toggle down on my notes here. What we are selling is not just high-end flatware. We're actually selling patriotic purchasing. And what I mean by that is our brand is, we're the only flatware manufacturers left in the United States. And that really grabs people's attention. And there are a lot, the Made in America brand it almost died. Back when we bought the company, it was not in vogue. Everybody was basically looking at us going, guys, that ship has sailed. Give it up. It's way cheaper to make it someplace else. Then the Lehman crisis happened. A lot of people lost their jobs. We had the Great Recession. And if you go on tools like Google Trends and you type in Made in America or Made in USA, we found that the amount of Google searches for products that were made in the USA doubled back in 2008 as people became more conscious. Well, why is the Made in America brand so relevant? Well, I'm sure that everyone out there knows of someone who maybe was involved in manufacturing. Maybe you live in a community that was devastated as we've lost 2/3 of our manufacturing jobs. You don't have to be in Pittsburgh or the Rust Belt. You can go all up and down the East Coast and look at some of the textile communities that have lost their factories. And yes, some people, particularly mid-level managers and upper managers, were able to move on to other things. But a lot of the line workers and engineers and people that worked in factories, and that was their livelihood, had to abandon their careers, and in many cases were devastated by that. There's also been a growing realization that globalization and this idea of free trade has not really worked out for our country and for a lot of other countries. And that shows up in the form of our trade deficits and some of the misery and loss of these good blue-collar jobs from the automotive industry down to textiles that used to be living wages with benefits and a career. And now that's all gone. It's welcome to Walmart, have a nice day, 30 hours a week, no benefits for a lot of those folks. Another thing that has popped up as a major concern are environmental issues. As you all know, climate change is a big topic these days, and anybody who's really serious about understanding carbon emissions will realize that 30 years ago, China wasn't even on the map, and now 30 years on, China produces more carbon emissions than the U.S. and Europe, the EU countries combined. It's really taken over. That's leveled off in recent years, but they're still by far the biggest offenders. Social and ethical concerns. I like to call it the blood diamond effect. The big part of our society right now, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, is paying people a living wage. I was listening to a podcast with Bob Lighthizer, who was our former trade representative who I've met a couple times, and he would say that the globalists would come in there and they'd say, "Oh my goodness, if we bring jobs back, that we're going to have a shortage of workers, and workers their wages are going to go through the roof." And he's like, "Is that really a problem? Isn't that what we want to happen? Is we want our middle class and our working class people to make a decent living?" So he sort of turned that back on him. But you hear about the Uyghurs in China. You hear about some of the slave labor, prison labor issues. We, of course, don't have that here in the United States. And there are people who are very concerned about that and turn to American-made products and other products made in the EU and other countries where those things don't exist. And then one of the things, when we started Liberty Tabletop, I did the whole thing. I mean, I was answering the phone, answering emails, packing stuff up, shipping it. I was a one-man show at that point. And in answering the phones, the number one question that I got is, where is the metal made? They wanted to make sure that the metal came from the United States because, and this has just never occurred to me, it's something you're putting in your mouth dozens of times a day. And where did this metal come from? And what's in there that's supposed to be, and what's in there that's maybe not supposed to be? So, of course, here in the United States, in Europe, in Canada, with strict regulations, each lot of steel is tested to make sure that everything that's supposed to be in there is in there in the right quantities, and things like lead and other contaminants are not in there. And that's not necessarily the case in the rest of the world. So those are some of the reasons in our particular products that people really are focused on made in America. Brings me to the next thing. I don't want to spend the whole time on policy and trade, but you're all probably watching the news, and like just about everyone, even people like me who are right in the middle of it, trying to wonder what the heck is going on with all these tariffs. Well, to understand it, there's really three different types of tariffs or reasons for tariffs that are being put on. The first one is tariffs designed to generate revenue, a revenue that's going to allow the middle class tax cuts to remain in effect and be paid for. A lot of people don't realize this, but the entire United States federal government up until World War II was funded strictly by tariffs and a couple of excise taxes, like taxes on beer and liquor. The income taxes didn't come in play until right about the time of World War II. The second reason to put in tariffs is protection tariffs. When you find that there are unfair subsidies, like in the case of steel and aluminum, which you've read a lot about if you turned on the news or picked up a newspaper, these are simply governments coming up with industrial policies to give their manufacturers an unfair advantage in the world. And you needn't look any further than to look at the countries that run huge surpluses in exports versus their imports to figure out who those are. And we'll get to that here in a second. And the third one are punitive tariffs. The most recent one today, the tariffs that are going to come out on April 2nd, the Trump administration is talking about anybody who imports oil from Venezuela is going to get a special tariff put on them. Of course, we've all heard about the fentanyl issue and the punitive tariffs being put on Mexico and Canada. Until that is dealt with, I don't really understand the Canada thing, to be honest with you, but they are one of the countries that runs a very significant trade surplus with the United States. So what is the end game on all this, which is really important to inventors as you decide where you're going to manufacture your product or where whoever you license your product is going to be able to is going to manufacture it. Now let me preface this. I've been going down to DC for about 8 years now, several times per year. Been involved in a trade group looking into all these matters. They're very tied in to the Trump administration, 1 and 2. They're very tied into the Biden administration, and of course, Capitol Hill. Democrats, Republicans, doesn't matter. It's about policy, not politics. And what this is really all about is balancing trade. We have been running huge trade deficits for decades now. It's not sustainable, and it has to be fixed. And Treasury Secretary Bissett came out over the weekend with his list of the dirty 15. And those are the 15 countries that run the biggest trade surpluses with the United States. And of course, you might guess China's on the top of that list, but Mexico, Canada, Vietnam, Indonesia, a lot of the other countries are on there as well. And I think what they're going to do is to try and set tariffs at such a level that we start to balance trade out. Because if we don't do that, our country will eventually go bankrupt. We are bleeding money outside of our country because we're buying more than we're selling. So it's just like at home, if you spend more than you are making, you can go into debt to a certain extent. You might be able to sell off your boat and your car and some of your assets, but eventually you run out of money and it becomes a very serious problem. So the concept that they're working on right now is reciprocal trade, and it's a work in progress. I spoke today and last Friday with some people who have been in meetings in the White House, and this is very much a work in progress. They haven't decided exactly how it's going to take shape, but it is going to eventually evolve into something that works towards balancing trade. And it may not all happen. It certainly will not all happen on April 2nd. They need to stop the bleeding because this has been the largest transfer of wealth in human history, and it must come to an end. I can tell you that, again, not a partisan issue. This might be the only thing down in Washington that both Democrats and Republicans can agree on, that something needs to give here. So what will the outcome of all this likely look like? I think you're going to see a renaissance in American manufacturing. It's going to be a situation where a lot of small manufacturing companies are born and start manufacturing items that have not been produced in the United States for quite a while. I think you're going to see a lot of large manufacturing, things like computer chips and solar panels and things like that take off. And you're going to see companies that are the last holders on, like us in the flatware industry, have an opportunity to really grow and expand our employment and our businesses. This will all create a resurgence in the industrial base in the United States, which has been really decimated over the last 30 years. It's critical to support American manufacturing and the middle class. It's also critical for national security. There are simply a lot of things that we need for our military and our national defense that we can no longer manufacture in the United States. Everything from ball bearings to certain grades of steel, and that needs to be corrected. What the other thing that will happen is the wealth that's created in the United States, and I believe the end goal is within the USMCA countries, Mexico and Canada, will stay in this region and not simply bleed off and be depleted overseas. This will support our communities. I can tell you that in our little community of 2,000 people in the city of Sherrill, when Oneida shut down a manufacturing facility with 2,800 employees, that facility was valued at millions and millions of dollars. When we took it over, it was an arm's length transaction. We didn't pay nearly that amount for it, so our property taxes went down, and the city of Sherrill panicked because this is money that they depended on to maintain the roads, to pay for the schools, to do all the things that they needed to do in their community. And from one day to the next, it went away. And the other thing that this will do much to Bob Lighthizer point, is there will be wage inflation as a result of this. There will be a lot of jobs open up in manufacturing, and that means that the middle class can be reborn. Part of that is these jobs are going to have to come with benefits. So there'll be jobs that people can live on and be proud of and go to work and have a career. So why is this all important to inventors? I guess my main point here would be that Made in USA is a brand, and it almost died, like I said, back in the early 2000s. It has come roaring back. 80% of Americans would, if given a choice, would rather buy an American-made product, and they're willing to pay a slight premium for that. When you go into I don't care whether you're going into a retail store or whether you're selling online, putting that flag and honestly saying that it's made in America is a huge selling point that will get you orders. There's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen. Even the guys making the decisions right now aren't quite sure how it's going to work out. And these trade wars, disputes, the way that this whole thing settle out, it depends just as much on our trading partner as it does on us and how they react. Nobody really knows what that means. So if you're trying to decide where you're going to manufacture a product right now, there is a lot of uncertainty with doing that offshore, particularly in Asia. Another thing that you might want to take into consideration is IP theft. Nike has fallen victim to this, and one of my favorite examples is Zippo lighters down in Pennsylvania. About 10 years ago, ran into a situation where their sales in Europe started falling off. Well, they were making some lighters in Asia, some of their cheaper stuff, and they started investigating. What they found was that the factory over there was making lighters for them on the first ship, selling it to them, and then they were making the exact same lighters and going to Europe and offering them at a discount to their distributors, and that's where their business was going. That happens internationally. It also happens here in the United States. One of the things that Bob Lighthizer brought up again in his conversation, and I've been touting this for years, is that Oneida, for example, went over and taught the factories in Vietnam, China, Indonesia, how to make their flatware and how to do it more efficiently and more effectively. And after 10 years or so, they dominated the manufacturing process. And then they sat back and said, why do we need Oneida? Why don't we just create our own brand and undercut them in the marketplace? Legacy brands like that are becoming less significant. Sales are shifting to places like Amazon, who is the main offender on this. I mean, you have your product sitting there on Amazon, and then right next to it, they're going to put Amazon Basics or some Asia Direct brand that you've never heard of, but it's 30-40% cheaper. And where do you think the consumers are going to gravitate? They're going to start eating into your sales. Another thing to take into consideration would be loss of control of a lot of aspects of your brand, lead times, and having your money tied up. One of the things that Oneida struggled with was their lead times went from 6 days to 6 months. So they're trying to forecast their sales 6 months out, and they were not prepared to do that, and it created a lot of inventory problems. From an inventor standpoint, you're probably not going to have 5,000 different products like they did, but you can imagine the nightmare that was for them. I would think from an inventor standpoint, you don't know how your business is going to grow 6 months from now. If you over order or under order, you might end up tying up a lot of cash. Quality and quality control. When you have a domestic manufacturer or somebody who's accessible, like Mexico, for example, you can actually visit those facilities, and if there is a problem, you know about it sooner rather than later. Not so much the case when you're dealing with manufacturing halfway around the world. Communication in time zones. You might think that's not such a big deal, but when it takes 2 days to get an answer that should take 1 day, sometimes that when you're trying to deal with a customer can really turn people off. And then the reaction time. Let's say that shipment does get here and something is wrong with it from a quality standpoint. How long is it going to take to get that replaced? Transit time disruptions, that actually played to our advantage during the pandemic. You remember all those ships that were lined up, 170 ships off the coast of Long Beach that couldn't get unloaded. We had product that, we bring in a coil of steel from Pittsburgh and ship it to your table. We didn't have to worry about ships being waiting months to get offloaded off the coast of California. And then, there's just the general political climate. We're not sure where this is all headed, particularly with respect to China. They are the manufacturing hub of the world right now. And it's not only, maybe you're not producing in China, but if you're producing in another country, let's say, for example, Mexico, and something does happen in China, everybody's going to leave China and they're going to go to Mexico. And then you're going to be caught up in a situation where your vendor may make decisions that you don't necessarily agree with. So how do you sort all this out? I've had a lot of interesting guests on the show, and one of the guests that I had on recently is a fellow by the name of Harry Mosier from the Reshoring Initiative. You can find that particular broadcast on Home Talk USA and listen to what Harry has to say. He actually will sit down with his clients and do a total cost of ownership estimator, because Harry's absolutely right. Most people take a look at, well, my unit cost FOB China is $2 and it would cost me $3 to make it here. So I'm going to save $1. Not necessarily the case by the time you take into consideration all these other factors. He can present you with case studies that show different examples of experiences that people have been through. Harry is not, I'm a little biased. I'm the Made in America guy, right? But Harry's very realistic about this stuff, and he's sort of a math nerd. So he will help walk you through and make sure that you're taking everything into consideration when making that onshoring or offshoring decision. And he also offers personalized help. That is pretty much, based on what Rita asked me to talk about, what I have at this point. I see I did ramble on for about 30 minutes, which is what she had to do. And I guess at this point, I'd like to open up the floor to any questions that people have.
Yeah, if you guys have got any questions, throw them out there. Andrea, go ahead.
So I have a question. Is it possible to say made in the USA if it's only assembled in the USA? Like, could you get parts from these countries where it's cheaper maybe to get parts and bring it to America to produce it and put it together in America? Okay.
The correct answer to that is to say made in USA, all or virtually all has to be made here. We're like the poster child for that, because we buy American steel and there's nothing else other than the stainless steel and a fork. But if you were making a toaster, for example, and everything was made in the USA except for the heating element, that's a critical part to that. You would have to move it to the second category, which is called assembled in the USA with globally sourced parts. And you can do that. If it is not all or virtually all made in the USA, please don't put made in the USA on there, because the Federal Trade Commission has gone after people, heavy fines. It's pretty easy for them to build a case and you will lose. So assembled in the USA with globally sourced parts is probably the way you want to go.
So Jeff?
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Andrea. Jeff, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, Rita and I talk about this a lot. I'm sure everybody else on the call knows about this, but typically you're to get something on the floor at a big box store. In my case, I have a tool. You're looking at 5x the manufacturing cost. So you have to keep the manufacturing cost, a fifth of what it takes to get it on the floor at Home Depot. So have you circumvented that by basically selling direct e-commerce? Is that the way you did that, or?
Yeah, we call it the factory to table model.
Yeah, you said that earlier. Yeah, I wondered. So then how do you, well, I guess you manufacture the stuff all yourself, so that makes a difference. But for someone like me, I don't have any manufacturing facility or, are there manufacturers in the States that will actually do custom stuff?
Yes, and it depends on what your product is.
Okay.
There is no manufacturer of toasters in the United States. There's one company that does some industrial toasters, but they're like $2,000 a piece. I'm talking about the stuff you have in your house. We do in our factory about 10-15% of our business is we call it OEM or private label. Cutco Corporation, you may have heard of Cutco.
Yeah, I know Cutco knives. Yeah, yeah.
We make their forks and spoons and serving pieces for them. Heath Ceramics. So, depending on if you were able to go out and locate someone who is making something similar, having grown up in manufacturing, you can't go into somebody who's making tires in a factory and ask them to make light bulbs. They just
Right,
don't.
sure.
Equipment or the experience is pretty obvious. But if you could find somebody who's doing something similar, and they're looking to expand their business, which most manufacturers are, you might find somebody that's willing to make something for you as a private label. Yeah.
Okay.
And we're starting to see things shift as, the appliances, refrigerators, washing machines, those bigger things, as the price of shipping has gone up, there's going to be a balance point. And I think, what I had heard is that 2025 is going to see that pendulum, come back to middle and then start swinging in our favor with things. Certainly there's some things that have already done that as far as quality. We had one gentleman, and he's been, I think you know him, Jeff, Ian Osborne. He had been manufacturing all of his miniature LED lighting systems.
Right, yeah.
And the quality was so bad that by the time he got done testing all of them and realized there was more than 10% failure rate, even though his price per unit was higher in the US, there wasn't the failure rate. So he was making more money by paying more to have them manufactured here than he would over there, and then throwing a big number of them out. So every different industry is going to have that pendulum swing where it makes more sense. And like Greg said, if you can find somebody that's doing something here and they're willing to white label yours, once you license it, the licensee will decide where they're going to make it. But we're seeing things starting to shift, and that's a good thing in our favor.
Well, and another thing that's going to happen as a result of all this trade shenanigans, you might remember back in the 1980s when Japan Inc. I'll never forget the Time magazine headline. They were going to take over the world, right? And it was the Honda Accord, and it was all the cars, and everything seemed to be coming out of Japan. Well, there was a thing called the Plaza Accords, where the Reagan administration sat down with them and said, "Look, guys, we don't mind if you own the company, just come here, build a factory, and make it here in the United States." So they started making Honda Accords. I believe it was in Ohio. So I don't think any inventors out there are going to go to Honda and have them make a product that you're making. But imagine all the little machine shops and the little manufacturing businesses that sprung up around that factory who were looking to expand their businesses. That's the kind of renaissance that you're probably going to see here in the United States as these large companies begin to make solar panels and chips. It's going to have a trickle-down effect on manufacturing, and 85% of the jobs in manufacturing are small businesses with 10 people or less. So that's the real renaissance that could help out the inventors, is just that resurgence of mom and pop manufacturing that might be able to help you out.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Thank
all
you.
do is pay attention and see where the different things are, what's happening and where. So, all right, go ahead, Mr. Crow. What is your first name? Is that even you?
I'm Greg, actually. I'm another Greg. I put
Greg, hi.
Crow in there just because, every time I go on public things that are recorded, I get unnecessarily paranoid because I haven't started my business yet. It's still just
All
the
right,
IP
so
part.
you in the Lakers.
I am. I'm a huge Lakers fan, and thank goodness
Yeah,
they.
you're probably going to get a bad answer from me because I'm a diehard Celtics fan. So
Hey, I
this is
love
a problem.
Celtics fans. You understand? People hate you if you're actually good. If you're insignificant, no one cares.
There you go. Yeah.
Um, but I will say that I don't have a lot of information or understanding of what the actual price point advantages in Asia are yet, and all around the world for outsourcing manufacturing. But the 25% tariff on some things in some places that President Trump is talking about, is that enough to offset the price? And I mean to be from a competitive standpoint of selling your product B2C. Does it bring your price close enough? Because the goal of a tariff is to convince people buy here, don't pay the tariff, because either way you're going to pay more. Is it enough? What would it take for American prices to be near par?
You know, I think that depends a lot on the product. You know, let's say, let's go to like a ridiculous example. If you're making bowling balls, you could make those. They're very heavy. They're very small. You could pack them in a container. The cost to get them here is relatively small. If you were making 55-gallon drums, you'd be shipping air. So 80% of the cost would be, so there's that transportation cost thing. In the flatware industry, unfortunately, it's only about 8% of the value to get things over here. But that could vary wildly by industry. And that cost of shipping is included in the tariff as well. It's the landed cost. So, excuse me. And then how big is the difference? Like in our case, 25% is not going to level the playing field. It'll make it closer though. And anybody who's ever run a manufacturing facility knows that volume is huge. So if I could double the size of my business and 30% of my business is fixed costs, my cost goes down by 15%. So giving a boost to volume and having your costs come down as you expand, between those two things, we think we've got a pretty good shot at a great future. Other products, 25% may put them completely over the top. Some products, it won't, like textiles, for example, might not make add up to a hill of beans because it's all labor, and the labor that they're using in some of these countries like Bangladesh is so cheap, you're never going to be able to come close to that, and you can't automate it.
Let me throw into that something. All right. When we bought our house, we had to change a lot of the light fixtures. I went on to Amazon. I got these really cute light fixtures. They were just gorgeous, and put them up. One promptly fell into the sink, cracked the sink, could not be fixed, had these stupid stinking light bulbs that, you've got to buy specialty. I took it down. I threw it in the trash. I went into Home Depot and I said, if it doesn't say made in America, I'm not going to buy it, because if it breaks, I'm bringing it back to you, John, and I'm going to hand it to you and say, replace it. So really, stop doing that, made in China thing. And you know what? I can tell by the price tag if some shirt I want to buy because it's so cute is made in China, and I will not go there ever again. So, it takes a little bit of practical experience and some disappointments and some lots, because you know what? I couldn't send the light fixture back to China. They wanted to charge me shipping to return it. I threw it in the trash, took a deep breath, had a drink, and then went into Home Depot and got myself a light that was made in America. And
You found a light that was made in America in Home Depot.
Well, the parts, I had to buy separate parts.
Okay.
And put together. Okay, but I told the guy, I said, if this falls apart, I'm bringing it back to you, John, and I'm going to hand it off to you with a little bit of a push on that. So he did. He sold me what I wanted. It has not fallen apart. It looks great. But the same thing with, if I'm buying, I never buy shoes made in China, because if you don't want blisters, you do not buy in China. But some practical experience helps you go looking for that made in America price tag. And, so that, I would rather have, something that's not going to fall into my sink and crack it, or something that is going to fit and last a while. Something I can put in the frickin' washing machine and not have it come out looking like a piece of junk.
And a lot of people, view some of the things that I say as being China bashing. I like to kind of clarify that for a minute. The reason that the products that you're finding at Home Depot and Walmart coming out of China are so cheap is because of something called the race to the bottom that everybody on the call has probably heard of. It's where Home Depot is competing against Lowe's, and they're trying to outdo each other by driving the cost down. And they're asking the Chinese, how can I make it cheaper? Make it cheaper, make it cheaper. And, volume carried them for a while, but now it's, what do we cut out of it? When the last days of Oneida, when they were trying to compete, a lot of quality issues were sacrificed in the name of lowering the cost by a half a penny so that they could drive their cost down in this sort of race to the bottom type thing. There are products coming out of China. They're perfectly capable of making wonderful things. It's the stores, it's the brands that are involved in this race to the bottom. You got to have the cheapest that are really behind this. When Matt and I started our business, we knew that if somebody was going to pay a premium for an American-made product, and if they were going to see that American-made label on there, they expected quality. They didn't want blisters, right? So we actually did a 180. And we started taking some of those process steps that had been eliminated to try and cut costs and put them back in there so that when people got their product, it did actually function and last like they expected it to. And I think that's another part of Made in America that you can really take control of. It's the other reason that we did not get involved with mainstream retail. Like Rita was talking about, these people are ruthless. They don't care about you, particularly Walmart. They'll charge back. You think you're selling them something for $5. By the time they're done, they pay you $4 because they've charged you for advertising. They charge you for a certain percentage of returns, even if they didn't have one. They take 90 days to pay instead of 30 days. It's a nightmare dealing with these people. Every company's a little bit different, but that is another thing to take into consideration when you're thinking about your channels of distribution. Obviously, I'm a big fan of the direct-to-consumer because of the value that you can provide by cutting out all that middleman markup.
Yeah, Mike, go ahead. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah. This is all super intelligent, and you know what, Rita, please, whenever you have a chance, I really want to go with licensing now. After originally I was thinking, hey, I'll be a startup and I got my education technology and my patents, but you guys have scared me enough, Greg, with all the backhanding.
That wasn't the idea.
No, I've learned. I mean, whatever. Without Rita, please. I just want a licensing.
All right.
Greg, in your opinion, do you think it's just smart to deal with licensing directly as a basement inventor crazy guy? That's probably the best bet because there's such a rabbit hole, rabbit hole to fall down. Yeah.
I think it depends on your level of experience, but if you've never made anything or manufactured anything, that's probably a pretty big thing to bite off. I would just encourage, as you license things, maybe you could find a domestic producer to license it to. There are a lot of them out there. And that may be a great approach to take. The further away you get from our shores, I think the more control you lose for a lot of the reasons that we talked about. And you just may find that your IP is being violated and you're just cut out of the picture with no royalties. So,
amen.
Yeah.
All right, Greg.
First, is it possible we could get a list of some of those maybe recommended domestic producers? Would that be possible?
We can do some of that, but it would make more sense if we knew where you were.
I'm in California, Southern California, and I manufacture hardware. Basically, fasteners.
Industry, not state. Yeah.
So you'd be dealing with like a machine shop or a job shop type place?
Yeah, machine shops and molders, because there's both there's varying different qualities and designs.
All right. Well, I just happen to have a friend who's from California, who's a rep for a lot of businesses that might fit that bailiwick, Michelle Nash Hoff, and she would love to talk to you. And if there's somebody that could make your products, she would probably know.
I'd
Great.
love to keep things in California, so that'd be great.
Yeah,
Yep.
great. Would you send me her information, please? We've got other tool guys out there that a lot of times we'll go to Tolson Tools as well. We met them at ASD, and they've got a couple of, actually 3 of our products right now. So, and one more that's landing on their desk. And
Yeah, I spoke to like Kilties and people like that, and their capital companies and things. But you know, it always comes back to having a personal connection, and smaller sometimes is just better, especially at the beginning. Grow together is my thing, because then you have a relationship. But the question I was going to ask is, I have IP stuff going with my product in Europe and the United States, especially would be big markets. And with the tariffs that are happening, you know, I want to keep as much production in the United States as possible, but does it make sense then to find maybe a distributor producer in Europe that's separate because of the tariffs?
It may.
Economies of scale matters. I understand that.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the reaction of, you know, let's say Germany. How do they react? If we say, okay, you guys are putting a 15% VAT tax on our cars the minute it enters the country, and when you sell a car to us, you're giving a 15% tax credit to Volkswagen that's shipping it over this way. So they're gonna slam tariffs on it. How do they react to that? Do they stop subsidizing their own stuff? Do they put an extra 15%? We really don't know. So I think it's a little premature to make that call at this point.
And sometimes it depends on the wholesale pricing and what makes the most sense. Sometimes, you know, you got a cool product, 25 cents isn't going to make much difference. $25 might. So it really depends.
Well, this is really extraordinary times. It's very uncertain. Like,
yes, it
very,
is.
very uncertain.
Yep.
Yeah.
Russell. You're muted.
So Greg, you say you're what, business to consumer. So like, well, what platforms do you sell on, and how do you get people to find you? Do you have Google search optimizing? I mean, do you have, if you don't like Amazon, where do you put your stuff?
About 80% of our sales are through our website, online sales. About 20% is through Amazon. We do, a lot of people only buy on Amazon, so we deal with them. Their bite is only 15%, so that's something we can live with. It's kind of a funny story if you have just a minute. We started off our website, and I used to joke the only people that went on there were our moms, because nobody else knew about it, right? So I pulled out $20 because I heard about this thing called Google AdWords, and I bid $1 a click on somebody who typed in the words flatware made in USA or flatware made in America. And I got 20 clicks for $1, and we got 2 sales for it. We spend about $30,000 a month on Google advertising now. Various campaigns to try and find people who are in market, which means they're looking for flatware made in the USA, or they're looking for silverware, or whatever they're looking for. Retargeting people that have been to our website, reminding them that we're here, making our brand look bigger. We actually do some national TV advertising. It's been very effective. That getting the word out and creating brand awareness for a brand that 10 years ago didn't exist is huge for us. And it really depends on the product. If you're selling candy bars, you have to be out there every day. People buy flatware once every 7 years. So the timing of when we're in front of them lends itself towards that in-market Google pay-per-click advertising. And then to your point, SEO, the organic listing, we rank #1 for flatware made in USA. We're probably on page 2 for flatware because there's so many people with so much more site authority that we'll never get there from here. But somebody's looking for flatware in the United States, we're hard to miss.
And then I'd also prefer to license, although when I contact companies, they said, well, you know, we need you to impress our salesmen. And like, now you have to sell a whole bunch before we'll even want to touch you. And like I prefer not to. And, you know, I've just made some blind spot mirrors in China, and, you know, and their price has gone up, because of the tariffs. And so I'm trying to like sell them, somehow put them on Google, or maybe have my website. And I just not sure. And then, like, is there a product liability thing too? I'm a small player. I mean, I don't know what I'd do if someone tried to say, I got in an accident, and, here's my mirror was on your car, and, there's all these things that just say, why am I even doing this? And then how can I get another company to license it without doing all that? And persuade them that they could do a better job than I ever could selling it. And it's kind of where I am.
Well, yeah, liability insurance is something that is pretty critical. We have it. The joke in our company is somebody sued us because they cut themselves with a knife, which means it works. We've been in business for 20 years. We've had a couple instances where people have come back at us, but we've always been able to deal with it. But it could happen, and that's probably one of the advantages of licensing. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rita, but depending on how that contract is written, I think you're still going to want to have some form of liability insurance based on the design, but it would be the licensee who would probably have to bear the brunt of the insurance to cover those type of incidents.
Yeah, the licensee pays for the product liability insurance because they're making it, and not you, but you'd still have basically an umbrella policy. If you had a new product, Russell, that went on a ladder, you would be in a lot of pain because you would have to have a $50 million policy to cover you in order to have a store like Ace sell your product. And we know that because we had a gentleman who had to do that. And but you've got a product that's, a new pet collar. All right. Not so much to worry about. New baby product. Oh, yep. You're going to be right out there with the ladder stuff. So different industries are going to have different thresholds. Different numbers of sales will also have a different threshold. So where you've got, you're not selling 2,000 units a month. All right. You would be really happy if you sold 200 a month. You would have a very different threshold than, a company that was selling 2,000 a month. So
you're talking about the insurance premium?
What's that?
Are you talking about the insurance premium? What do you mean by threshold?
A different, the number of sales, the amount of sales is going to have a different threshold than, based on numbers on your premium. So there might be a base minimum, but if you are, as your numbers go up, so does your premium then. So if you want to talk to somebody specifically about that and how it impacts you, I can send you the name of a guy. I got a guy.
Well, I'm in the industry of making blind spot mirrors. So what kind of, how is that industry, I
mean, I don't know. All right. You gotta talk to a professional, not my sandbox.
Right.
All right. Jeff, you got a question.
Yeah, I was going to ask Greg. So how did you get jump started? I mean, obviously, I worry about things like, hey, I've got to buy 5,000 units of my product once I figure out how to get it cost optimized for manufacturing, and storing it, and all those things that come along with being able to deliver when you get an order, that kind of thing. Do you have any thoughts on how that all occurred for you guys? Or
well, we sort of bootstrapped it and then had to bootstrap it again. When Matt and I bought the factory, we received a grant from the state of New York for providing in excess of 100 jobs and keeping the thing open. We got a contract with Oneida to supply them with packaging services and a couple of other things that we did. We made some product for them. That lasted for about 2.5 years. It came to an abrupt halt when they filed bankruptcy, and we followed because our only customer, we had a non-compete, stopped buying from us. So we lost our revenue. That's when we did Cheryl Manufacturing 2.0 and invented the Liberty brand and strapped out on our own. I mean, Matt was down in the factory scrapping some of the excess equipment we had, getting scrap metal prices for it so we could make payroll. I mean, we lived through that sort of times and bootstrapped this business back to where, now we're in a much more stable growth mode.
Right.
it's always funny when people look at you as a business owner and they think, oh, there's this nice business owner. He's driving around in a nice car. It must be easy. It must be nice. There are days when
Sure.
question why you ever got involved in this.
Yeah.
But answer your question, Jeff, there's a company in California that is called Packwell Manufacturing. And
Yeah.
if you have your product shipped to them, then they will warehouse for free and they will do your shipping for you.
Yeah, I remember she was on the call a few months ago, I think.
And
Yeah.
so it doesn't matter if you are, if you got an Amazon order or from your website or whatever, they will do then your shipping.
Okay.
I might have misunderstood the question. Yeah, there's any number of logistics companies. We choose to do our fulfillment ourselves. We also ship product into the Amazon fulfillment system, which can be used for sales off the Amazon platform. Believe it or not, they're turning into a logistics company. So there's all sorts of options to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I like Packwell because they really focus on the Inventor, and they will do then the smaller, inventories, and then they will warehouse for free if you have them doing your shipping.
Yeah.
So, and her grandfather invented the blister pack, so that's kind of cool. So, anybody else have any questions for Greg or for me before we, we're running just over our hour, so we like to try to keep it, to the point. And, you always know how to get a hold of me. And if you've got a question for Greg, I can forward you his information.
Sure.
And if you're looking for a particular type of manufacturing, for a particular industry, we can collaborate with Greg and some of his resources. Some of the ones that I've got, for guys that are manufacturing in the U.S. textiles and all that kind of stuff. So we've got a pretty good resource database now for, our inventors and for what you need.
Thank you guys
Sorry,
for being
one
here.
more.
I appreciate it.
Oh,
Yeah.
I had a small question. This is actually really great. When you set up a licensing agreement or licensing deal, how much additional legwork do you have to do outside of the sort of inventive assistance, like this is how the product would be made, or etc.?
The more you've done, the easier the deal is to make. So like Russell has gotten a short run done on his. It's certainly easier when you've had some sales. That's what Jeff is considering doing, but we know he wants to license it. Some of the folks at the show, they're going after some short run manufacturing. Short runs based on price point is anywhere between 500 and 1500. Where you've got more of a software product, you can get some users and be able to have some testimonials. That makes a huge difference. Okay.
Oh, so of course. Yeah, thank you so much, Greg and Rita. As always, this is super helpful all around. Thank you.
So,
Well, I would finish it up by one of my favorite sayings. It's actually in Mandarin Chinese. It's the word for crisis, which it seems like we're in this crisis right now with manufacturing and tariffs and all this kind of stuff. In Mandarin Chinese, it's actually made up of two words. One is danger, and the other is opportunity. And I think that's really what we're facing right now, is a lot of opportunities here in the United States that are going to rise from this disruption. And I hope you all can take advantage of that.
well, excellent. Thank you for those words of wisdom, and thank you so much for your time tonight. And guys, it was always good to see you, and we will have the recording posted. So if you've got any other questions, whatever, you know how to find me. Talk to y'all later.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Greg. Yeah.
Bye.